Welcome. Good afternoon. This is an online forum hosted by the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. I'm Rennie McKay, the Game and Fish's Communications Director. These online forums, we've tried a few of these over the last few months, are a new way for us to try speaking with people in Wyoming and outside of the state who care about wildlife. We want to provide information to all of you and to hear from you, so we're trying this new venue. Thank you very much for bearing with us. Right now, I'd ask if you can add in a chat, if you can hear all right, if the volume is coming through okay on your computers, please send us a note if there are any bugs you're getting, and do bear with us if we have any technical glitches. This is something we are really excited about because it's hopefully going to make it easier for you to participate and learn from Game and Fish and to give us feedback, but we are working through some technical hurdles to get this to you. This afternoon, I'm joined by the Director of the Game and Fish Department, Scott Talbot, the Chief of the Wildlife Division, Brian Nesvik, Deputy Chief of the Wildlife Division, Doug Grimmeyer. Thank you all for joining, being here today, and mostly thank you for taking the time out of your days to be here to participate live, and also thank you very much for those of you who aren't watching live but have taken some time to watch this video here over the coming days or weeks to learn more about where we're at right now with wildlife here in these wintry conditions. Today, Scott, Brian, and Doug will go through some information on winter conditions and impacts on wildlife, some of the biology of your wildlife, and how they cope during the winter. And we're also going to address some of the frequent questions Game and Fish is getting about actions like emergency feeding and protecting big game from coyotes when they are susceptible. So those are a few of the topics we'll hit today. If you would like to ask a question, you need to sign in on our webpage, and then you need to join the Winter Wildlife Impacts under Available Rooms. And you can ask a question here live. We'll try to answer as many of those as we can between now and 1 o'clock. If you have questions that we don't get to, or you have questions later on, we will be able to answer those here today and through the next about 10 days. We'd like to take your questions and get your feedback as well. So we're going to try to wrap this up in an hour to make it manageable for you to watch and not take up too much of your time. So thank you again for being here. If you have those questions, feel free to type those in, and we'll start to answer those soon. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Director Talbot.
Thank you, Rennie. Good afternoon. Thanks for taking a moment to join us today, and hopefully you will find this very informative, and we certainly have committed to having an open dialogue with the public on lots of issues. Certainly right now we'd like to talk to you about the condition of the winter in Wyoming. Our wardens and biologists are finishing up their wildlife surveys as we speak. Deer surveys have been completed, and we're ongoing with bighorn sheep and elk surveys at this time. Certainly one of the topics that has come to our attention, as well as most of your attention, is the winter conditions throughout the state of Wyoming. And for those of you who have been in Wyoming for a long time, you'll know that this isn't uncommon. And looking back, the winter of 78, 79, the winter of 83, 84, the winter of 92, 93, and most notably, or most recently, the winter of 2010, 2011, where we had nearly 300% of snowpack through that winter, and unprecedented flooding in the spring of 2011. And during that time, we didn't have an avenue to exchange information with the public, and trying to share information on those natural disasters, if you will, difficult times for wildlife. Again, in the summer of 2012, that was the hottest, driest summer on record in the state of Wyoming, and fawn survival in many herds in the state was considerably diminished. But we're trying to reach out to you and certainly share our observations and get the news to you. So I'll move this along, and I would turn it over to Brian and Doug to provide more details to you about winter weather conditions and what effects those have on our wildlife populations, primarily deer and antelope.
Thank you, Director. And as Randy and the Director have indicated, we really do appreciate folks taking the time to participate in this kind of a new way for us to communicate with people who care about wildlife in our great state. I think it's important for folks to understand that we are concerned. As the Director indicated, we're having a pretty difficult winter. And the department shares the concern that many of you share and that you've articulated to us with the winter conditions that we're experiencing. I can tell you that our folks that work out in the field across our state are keeping a very close eye on those conditions, and also the how our wildlife and your wildlife are behaving, and trying to monitor to the best of our abilities the effects of this winter. I'm going to just kind of move around the state and talk about those areas that are most affected by this winter. We are fortunate in the fact that many of the winters we talked about from the past that were considered severe winters, this particular one so far has really only impacted the western part of the state, west of the Continental Divide, with a few exceptions. Certainly our Jackson region is one that has experienced extremely high snowpack. The valley floor, there's many folks that I've talked to in the past few weeks that have talked about never seeing that much snow on the valley floor in Jackson Hole. We expect that snowpack, well, at least in the early part of this month, last week, was up in the 150 to 200% range, and we do expect that those deer that haven't left that area are going to be susceptible to higher rates of mortality than we would see in a normal winter. The good thing about a lot of the wildlife in Jackson Hole is that they do leave during the winter, and so a lot of deer have migrated either south or to the east over into the other side of the Yellowstone ecosystem. And you'll hear this repeated throughout the other regions in the western part of the state that we certainly expect that fawn survival is going to be much lower than normal, and that's what we typically see in these kind of winters. In the Pinedale region, as we speak today, they've experienced another significant snow and wind event over the last 24 hours, and I was informed this morning that for the first time in 31 years the schools were closed in Pinedale. So they are experiencing some severe conditions and a lot of conflict, wildlife conflict, in the south part of their region where big game, specifically elk and pronghorn, have moved out away from traditional winter ranges and are now in conflict in more agricultural areas like the Farson area. We have folks there that are spending time every day out trying to minimize and reduce those conflicts between big game and people and agriculture. The good news there too, though, is that many of those big game species, particularly pronghorn and deer, have migrated further south than they do in a normal winter, have crossed Highway 28 between Farson and Lander, and are now down into more of the Green River region. The other side of the Pinedale region, so over towards the Wyoming range and even further west, is also experiencing severe winter conditions. They've had a lot of snow just in the last few days, and those winter ranges are definitely impacted. Moving further south down into the Green River area, the conditions are slightly better. They did go through a period of time where they did have deep snow that is now settled, and they had a pretty decent period of time where the temperatures were very low, below zero temperatures for several days. And so, I was just in Green River yesterday, and I would and talked with all of those folks, and I would say that in the south part of the Green River area, things are starting to moderate a little bit and look a little bit better for wintering big game populations. The other area that's probably of a little concern right now is the far northwest portion of the Cody region. So basically, Cody and west. There have been some impacts that our folks have seen kind of on a localized level on wintering big game, and but there's also been some good Chinook winds that have helped bear off some of the slopes that are really important for wintering big game populations, particularly sheep and deer and elk. And so while they've had more snow than they've had in many, many years, specifically in the North Fork and South Fork drainages, the conditions there probably aren't as severe and having as much of an impact on wildlife as they are in the places that I just described. In the other parts of the state, they're definitely most folks of our folks are classifying it as kind of a normal to maybe a little bit above average type of a winter. Certainly there are some localized areas where there's been, heavier snowfalls and colder temperatures that there's been some concern. But in general terms, generally speaking, most of the rest of the state is not experiencing those kind of increased impacts on big game like we're seeing in the west of the Continental Divide. I think it's also important for folks to remember that we, at this point in time, this is just kind of a snapshot right now. We still have a lot of time left where big game will be spending time on winter ranges, and we're not going to really know what the outcomes are until a lot of the snow has been cleared away by the wind and by the sun and temperatures, and our wildlife managers, with the help of a lot of you, those of you that have been involved in our volunteer projects in the spring to do deer winter mortality surveys, will have an opportunity to get out on the ground in the coming months and really assess what kind of impacts we might have had. I think it's important to note too that in the past, the director talked about some of the other bad winters that we've had in the past, and I think it's important to remember that while those did have some of them very severe impacts on big game, and we had very high mortality, that in many of those winters the recovery was fairly quick. In relative terms, 3 or 4 years in a wildlife population is fairly quick, and so with the exception of the winter of 92-93, other severe winters, we've seen some pretty good recovery within 3 to 4 years, and in the 92-93 winter it was longer than that, probably closer to 7 years. It's important, I think, for folks to understand too that wintering, our wildlife populations in the state have evolved in these kind of harsh conditions, and they're very resilient, and it always amazes me, and it amazes a lot of our field people to see how resilient our populations are to these kind of what would seem to us to be untenable kind of conditions. As Rennie indicated, we do have some concerns, in localized areas where big game populations have become more vulnerable to predation. We're trying to monitor some of those impacts as our field people are out monitoring these winter ranges, and we don't have a good feel for that right now. We do know though that there is some science that indicates that in localized areas when big game are having are exposed to harsh conditions, that they can be more vulnerable to predation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug here for a few moments and have him discuss some of the biology of deer, and also some of the things that we've done to analyze where we're at with potential feeding. Doug?
Thanks, Brian. I think through Wyoming's migration initiative and through our cooperation with the other states, coordination that we have with the western states, and the collaborations we developed with the University of Wyoming, we probably know more about mule deer today than we have at any time prior. And as wildlife managers, we do share the public's concerns about the conditions for mule deer in particular, and we've discussed the potential for feeding, and it's not a decision that we've taken very lightly. We've given a lot of consideration to a number of factors that influence the decision to feed. And what I'd like to start off with is just kind of a little overview of deer biology. Deer are considered to be a selective forager. They have real small mouth parts, and so they're very specific in their dietary needs and their nutritional requirements. Their digestive system is very specialized, and their stomach has a microbial or bacterial population that's very specific to the type of vegetation they're eating. So in the spring, the bacteria can digest forbs, and towards the wintertime, it starts to move towards a bacteria that can help digest more woody vegetation. And that being said, rapid changes to their diet can lead to kind of chemistry changes in their stomach, and they can actually be poisoned from certain types of food that they're given during the wintertime if it's changed too rapidly. And we've had a number of instances where deer have been found dead with full stomachs. And the other thing, deer have evolved to put on fat throughout the fall. And as we know, most winter forage is very poor in nutrition. And so the animals have evolved to burn their fat reserves through the winter. Another adaptation that mule deer have is that they behaviorally migrate to lower elevations, as Brian had talked about. And we've also found through Dr. Kevin Monteith's work at the University of Wyoming that deer experience a natural suppression of their diet during the wintertime. So they generally don't consume as much because their body has evolved to kind of use up some of the fat reserves. And it's these types of physiological and behavioral adaptations that help mule deer survive in Wyoming. Aside from those biological factors, we also considered that last year the growing season was exceptional for all of our big game animals. And by all accounts, animals entered the winter in really pretty good body condition, and they had a lot of fat reserves. We also have reviewed the literature that's currently available on feeding. Utah has a pretty good article in some scientific journals, and we've had our staff travel to Colorado in 2007 to help initiate and provide supplemental feed for deer in Colorado. The studies that we're aware of did not show that overall survival changed or improved with the use of supplemental feed. And basically, deer are extremely aggressive towards each other when there's a food source, and so the dominant animals tend to take over a site and keep the younger, weaker animals from acquiring the amount of nutrition and food that they need. Another thing that Utah found when they've studied some of their feeding sites is that even though the deer are fed, they're still going to consume a lot of the browse adjacent to a feeding area, and so they cause some pretty serious habitat problems and damage to the shrubs that they rely on during the wintertime to consume. And so that's another concern. One of the things that we've considered is the short stopping of migrations. We know that we've got some phenomenal migration patterns of deer that come from the high country, and our managers in western Wyoming are still involved in laying down fences and helping deer move across and antelope move across some of the highways in western Wyoming. And so a feeding operation initiated at the wrong time would actually prevent those animals from continuing their migrations. In addition, feeding can cause an animal to change its behavior. They can become more accustomed to urban centers, which would lead to a number of problems between domestic dogs, animals frequenting roadways and causing more vehicle collisions. And we've documented a number of times in Wyoming where private citizens have fed deer, and we've had predatory animals move in. We've had lions in towns, and we've had to take additional action to remove predatory animals. And then, of course, dogs chasing wildlife is kind of a problem that we have whenever deer move down into an urban center. Probably the most serious issue that we've considered when discussing supplemental feeding is disease outbreaks. And infectious diseases, including CWD, parasitism, and necrotic stomatitis, are all things that we consider. But probably the one that we really fear quite a bit right now is adenovirus, which is a hemorrhagic disease, causes bleeding in the stomach and lungs and in the mouth. And this is one is particular of concern because we've documented it on some of the feeding areas in western Wyoming where private citizens have fed. And it primarily affects those younger animals. And this past year, it caused us additional mortality on our fawns in the Wyoming range. And so we're really concerned about those types of things. And the bottom line is that all of our staff have given some serious consideration to the feeding issue. And it's been documented that there's very limited nutritional value to providing supplemental feed to deer just because of the selective nature of their digestive system and all the disease issues that are out there. And so, from a staff standpoint, we do not support providing supplemental feed to deer. And during the course of this winter, our biologists and wardens will be in the field continuing to monitor conditions and animal behaviors. And as Brian mentioned a few minutes ago, There'll be some mortality surveys that are scheduled for in May that people can get involved with, and we'd suggest that you reach out to the Pinedale and Green River regional offices and keep in tabs with them to find out when those are scheduled.
So to kind of wrap this up, and then we definitely want to hear some questions. I want to make sure that folks understand that we will, we're right in the beginning phases of our season setting process, and certainly we will be considering all of the information that we have now and that we gather right up until the day that we go and make recommendations to the commission regarding the seasons. The other thing, I think that this is an important time to reflect on something that's a little bit more long term, and that is the investment that the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission and the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resources Trust have both made for big game, and specifically mule deer, over the last several years. And because of some of the investments they've made in habitat improvement projects, we're hopeful that some of those will minimize or reduce the impacts that this kind of a winter will have on big game populations. The mule deer initiative as well is something that has been, I think, really reflected the state's interest, all of your interest in mule deer, and that's been going on now for 10 years and has had a lot of participation from many of you regarding how the state moves forward with looking at specific mule deer herds where we have concerns, and how we invest money in habitat improvement. Some of the other things that we're asking folks to help us with is really paying attention to places where wildlife is on the roads. We've tried to work with some of our other partners to get signs out on roads where we're having increased mortality on the roads, and so reducing speeds and paying attention to those signs is something that everybody can do to kind of help here, especially during periods of darkness. And the other thing is that one of the best things for these critters that are out trying to make a living in these conditions right now is for them to be left alone to the maximum extent possible. And so obeying winter range closures, and then when you see violations of winter range closures, reporting those to the appropriate land management agency is important. And I think that by just understanding the fact that sometimes human presence in those areas where those animals are wintering can have an effect, and using good common sense is helpful and something that everybody can participate in. Regardless of what the department ends up doing to address some of these situations around the west part of the state, we really need help from all of you in getting the word out on some of the things we've talked about here today. And again, we really appreciate your time and look forward to your questions.
Great. Thanks a lot, everybody. And again, thanks to everybody for joining us here. If you do have a question for us, again, you do need to log into the chat, sign in there, and then join the Winter Wildlife Impacts under available rooms. And again, we will be taking questions all week, so if you post a question there, we don't answer it right now, we will get to it later, and so look for an answer to your question here as the week goes on. First question is from Roger Hayden. Roger, thanks for joining us. The question is, what evidence do you have that killing coyotes will benefit prey species like mule deer?
So we have some indications in some other research that's been conducted, and actually there's research that goes back for quite some time that indicates when big game populations, specifically deer, are exposed to other events that place stress on them, that they can be more vulnerable to predation. Specifically and more recently, we have indications on some research that's going on in southwest Wyoming that as much as 30% of the fawn mortality there is due to coyote predation. There are certainly other places where there's not indications that coyote predation has an effect on deer, but we do have some evidence that it certainly does in some places.
Thanks, Brian. Next question is from Joy. Joy, thanks for again being with us. And the question is about compensation to livestock owners if there's damage to small haystacks or owners with limited amount of hay, for personal livestock. Is there any compensation available to those folks who are having extra damage this year. So you're saying some of that's happening around Farson with elk.
Yeah. So good afternoon, Joy. I think you're aware with the fact that we do have regulations and statutes that are related directly to compensation of private property owners that experience damage from big game animals, trophy game animals, and game birds. And so if an agricultural producer who has an agricultural operation in Farson is experiencing damage to, let's just say, a stored hay crop, they do qualify for some compensation to replace and to offset their costs that when they have losses to big game. And what they really need to do, what folks need to understand, is if they are experiencing that kind of damage, they need to contact their local game warden, and their local game warden can help them with filing the claim. And there's requirements on the timing there. And the best practice for folks is to just, if they've got that kind of damage going on, to report it immediately to make sure that they meet all of the statutory requirements.
And that contact information for local game wardens is available on our website under the law enforcement tab. So if you're looking for that contact information or to get that out to people you've heard of who are experiencing that and want to be in touch with their local game warden, that's on our website under the law enforcement tab. Next question from Joey Fagley. Joey, thank you for being with us. The question is there a reason why you couldn't just feed deer alfalfa? And I think you touched on this a little bit, but really good, I think, to hit on this a little bit more.
Yeah, so alfalfa, this time of year in particular, would be a really rapid change for those animals, and the microbes in their stomach have not adapted to that type of nutritious feed. And basically it changes the acidic level in the animal's stomach, and the material isn't as well absorbed, and it becomes toxic to those animals. And we've had a number of cases in western Wyoming where deer that have migrated in to a haystack suddenly get on hay and they just start dropping over dead right in the haystack. We've had moose in western Wyoming too that have done the same thing. And when you start looking at that animal and trying to determine the cause of death, they usually have a stomach that's full of nutritious food. They just haven't been able to digest it.
Thanks, Doug. Next question is from Wade Hawkinson. Wade, thank you very much for being with us today. And the question is, are you going to start cracking down on people collecting antlers illegally in Sweetwater County? And Brian is chief game warden as well, so in terms of that issue in antler collection right now, you want to address that?
Yeah, so I can tell you, Wayne, that we have, I think you're probably well aware of the fact that west of the Continental Divide, there's currently statutory authority for the commission to regulate the collection of shed antlers there, and there is an antler season, so it's illegal on public lands for people to be collecting antlers until the season opens in May. What we've done over the last couple of probably 4 to 5 seasons since that law was enacted is we've increased our patrols and conducted task forces and put extra people out on the ground to try to enforce that law to ensure that that folks are complying with the antler regulation. And as you've indicated by your question, there have been folks that have not complied with that, and we've done our best to try to apprehend those folks and ensure that justice is served.
And Doug, I know in one of the press releases we've put out lately on this issue, you touched on that, and that is every person who's out on private lands, public lands, if they want to help wildlife here and big game this winter, one thing is just to try to avoid getting them spooked so they start moving, right?
That's right, yeah. If an animal's in an area, try to give them as much space as you can to avoid that disturbance, because once you start causing that animal to move away from their area where they're loafing, or maybe they're in an area where there's a little bit of a food source there yet, that animal's got to expend additional energy to do that, and that can be vital this time of the year for them.
So again, thanks a lot for joining us. Here with me, we don't have chroma keys or anything like that for broadcast television, but this is Scott Talbot, the Director of Game and Fish, Ryan Nesvik, the Chief of the Wildlife Division, and also the Chief Game Warden, and Doug Mermeyer, who's Deputy Chief of the Wildlife Division. Next question, we've got some folks on Facebook joining us too. This is, I think, probably a big question for us as and that is so you don't have a plan, or is our plan just to let nature take its course at this point? And so I think that's probably a big thing to answer is what are our thoughts on plans?
I get that. Yeah, and just to reemphasize, I think we've given some really serious consideration to our options that are on the table before us, and we believe that the best option is for nature to take its course in this case, again, because of the disease potential and parasites and problems that occur when you do provide that supplemental food. And it's going to be it's a pretty tough decision, and it's one that we've given some pretty serious consideration to. But we think that's the best course.
And I think what I would add is that one of the things we have heard from the folks that we've talked to about this issue is that they really expect us to take the information that's available and use our expertise as wildlife managers in conjunction with the things that we've heard from you and make a decision here that's in the best interest of wildlife and all of you. And so that's really what we're trying to do here, is to make sure that we're considering all of those factors. And the other thing I think that's important is that we, while we spend a lot of our time focused on science, and a lot of our decisions are informed by science, we're all human beings as well. And it is very difficult for us to see nature working the way that nature works, and to see a big game animal, a deer, curled up in a ball out on the winter range is tough. But at the end of the day, I think we do have to make reasonable decisions based on the best information that we have available to us today, and that's what we've really tried to do here, and also to be honest with the public and tell them exactly what factors and what information has informed our decisions.
Well, one other thing I just asked you to touch on is a little bit is when I arrived at Game and Fish a couple years ago, the biggest pressure on mule deer, for example, was drought, and the work that the Mule Deer Initiative was doing was long-term planning to help survivability through droughts in the future and to help them through bad winters. So in terms of what are our best planning to help things like mule deer, I think we'd step back and talk about the Mule Deer Initiative and the work that's going on in habitat, so the deer are better prepared to survive tough winters and drought years as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's very true, and that the Commission's allocated a lot of funding to habitat projects across the state, and our field managers have implemented projects from the Green River region all the way up through Cody and into the Bighorns to kind of put those winter ranges back in a little bit better condition. And so, it's our feeling that it's pretty tough to watch this happen, but in the long term, the habitat's going to be in better condition. We've got a number of projects the Commission has allocated money, and the Wyoming Natural Resource Trust Fund has put money towards, and so we're going to be in a pretty good position.
Great. Thank you very much. Another question off of Facebook. This is from Mike Brown. Mike, thank you for joining us here this afternoon. Any particular parts of the state more affected than others? I think just to be good to recap again one more time about where we're really talking about the worst of the severe winter conditions.
Yeah, so Mike, mainly, to be very general, mainly west of the Continental Divide is where we at this point have seen, the highest snowpack, the coldest temperatures, and the biggest impacts at this point on big game animals. Additionally, there's been some tougher than normal conditions in the far northwest corner of the Cody region. So basically west of Cody on the North Fork and the South Fork, and then up in the Sunlight Basin. But for the most part, those are the places most affected. Places further east in the state have certainly experienced a winter, but not to the same extent with the temperatures and the deep snow that the western part has.
These conditions aren't isolated to Wyoming, and so we got a question here from Todd Peterson off Facebook. So Todd, thanks. And this is, I think, a huge question, and that is because the severe winter conditions aren't isolated to Wyoming, other states are having to consider this as well. And you've got Colorado doing some baiting with emergency feeding, and Utah and Idaho doing some emergency feeding, Montana not doing some. So that question of, why are those states feeding given they've got the same science as we do? Any thoughts to address that?
Sure. I think maybe the director, he just had an opportunity actually to meet face to face with those directors recently, and it might be good for Scott to talk a little bit about that.
And certainly there are some opportunities, and I think that in looking in my discussions with those directors, they're trying to move some of those animals, specifically deer, away from highways to reduce highway mortalities and that's more of a baiting, if you will, than a feeding. And I guess I'd go back to what Doug mentioned to folks earlier. Obviously, those states don't have chronic wasting disease in those areas, nor have they documented adenovirus. And short-term feeding and baiting of those populations, even on a localized level, may have some very long-term health and welfare repercussions for those populations. And that, as Doug mentioned, adenovirus, we're very concerned about that all throughout the Wyoming range and most of western Wyoming.
And Doug, does adenovirus only affect deer, on only mule deer, or does it affect any other species?
they've had it in moose as well, but it's mostly a deer virus that I'm aware of anyway. But it's been tied back specifically to feeding operations in western Wyoming, where private citizens have provided food, and it's affecting those younger animals. And then usually it kicks in the late winter and spring periods when it's been detected a lot. And so we're especially sensitive to that, given where we're at right now and time of the year.
Thanks. Another question off Facebook. This is from Rowdy Anderson. Rowdy, thanks for shooting us a question. So the question is, are you going to take any precautions now regarding tag allocations? So I'm talking about licenses and season setting for 2017.
Yeah, so Rowdy, what we're going to do is when we make have a final set of recommendations that we're going to take to the commission in April, it will basically consider all of the information that we've collected up to that point, and it will consider predictions that we make on how severe mortality will be on fawns and also adult animals. Right now it's difficult to make those predictions, but I think we will be in a better position to do that before we go into season setting. We do always have the ability to, if we get that wrong, if we make a prediction that's not, we find later to not be accurate, we have the opportunity and the authority to work with our commission to do, to take emergency actions even after seasons are set, right up until the day that seasons open and during the seasons. And so I think you have an excellent point, and I think that is certainly one of our biggest responsibilities as the Wyoming Game and Fish Department and the commission, to ensure that we do a good job of setting those seasons, and we consider all of the potential effects on our big game populations. That's a good reason for us to set seasons on an annual basis, and that's the reason we've done that for so long.
Director, I think you've talked about this a little bit lately too. That's one of the reasons you want to have this conversation right now with the public is so we're going to move into season setting and going out for public comment. So if they're informed and hearing this information, hopefully they'll stay involved.
Absolutely. I think that's a very valid point, Rennie. And as we move through the process, we encourage people. In the last couple of years, we've had post-hunting season meetings, and we try to make ourselves available to everyone during the season setting process, and really encourage folks to get engaged and involved in those processes. And as Brian indicated, the Wildlife Division will make their very, very best scientific and public estimate on where we need to move with those populations and implement those seasons. But should the winter die-offs be more severe than we anticipated, we have the opportunity through commission action to either reduce those quotas or even in some cases recall licenses.
Excellent. Thank you very much, both of you. Question from Julius. Again, thanks for everyone who's logged in and taken the time to get all set and send us some questions. If you've got your questions, we'll try to get to those. We'll also be answering questions in the coming days. And we're also interested if people do have some comments they want to shoot our way, and we want to see those up there on our website. So we've set that up to take your comments after the fact as well. So Julius is asking, do we need more wildlife fences and underpasses, Highway 189 south to I-80 for one? And I think this is also a bit of a comment that Julius is thinking that would be a help generally and probably during a winter like this. Any response to that comment?
Yeah, I think that in some of those localized areas, certainly overpasses or underpasses are a valid approach to minimize mortality from vehicles. And as YDOT works, they've been great to work with, and they've been looking at options south of Jackson for some fencing, and that's basically in their work schedule now for some areas south of Jackson. And in other parts of the state, as those projects come up for review, we'll be looking at hot spots, and if there's options there, I'm sure that we can continue to move forward with that.
Yeah, it looks like I believe we're trying to get set for an April public meeting and bringing a whole bunch of people together to talk more about highways and wildlife here.
Yeah, there is a forum scheduled for the end of April in Pinedale with YDOT, and you know, if viewers are interested in that, they should kind of keep watching our website because there'll be more information and registration information on there.
Thanks, Doug.
Hey, Rennie, real quick on that too. I think this is an important point, and this is a good time to highlight what we've seen as the department, and also what the Wyoming Department of Transportation has seen with the success at Trappers Point and also at Nugget Canyon near Cokeville. Both of those projects, either with overpasses or underpasses, have reduced big game mortalities on the roads and have increased public safety. And same thing with down on 789 near Bags. And so we've had this discussion internally and also with some of our partners about looking along the I-80 corridor and other places on where the next Trappers Point or the next Nugget Canyon may be, where we might be able to work together to come up with a new overpass or underpass that will help migrating big game animals.
Yeah, I guess even just to add on to that, there's a bill that's looking for to study I-80 a little bit more, and I believe that's being discussed as part of that bill too. So if you want to tune into the legislative session and watch that, it's a great time to do it. A good question and a timely question. Another question. This is Lorna Miller. Lorna, thank you very much for the question. Some feedback. Signage on the roads is not especially effective unless the speed limits are reduced and enforced. Does Game and Fish actively cooperate or lobby the Wyoming Department of Transportation to initiate temporary or emergency speed reductions in high mortality areas like south of on Highway 89 in the Jackson Hole area? And if not, why not? Why? And there's a question here: why not refuse recent requests to reduce speed limits in the Jackson Hole region? And Doug just came from there, so I think
I'm not familiar with the proposal that was to reduce the speed limits south of Jackson, but we've worked pretty closely with with YDOT south of Pinedale, and we provide information to all of our agency partners when we're working towards facilitating safety for humans and people as they're traveling on the highways, and to kind of reduce that vehicle collision on wildlife, the impacts on wildlife itself. But we're always willing to work with folks on evaluating and looking at those proposals.
We did work with the Wyoming Department of Transportation recently on the stretch south of Pinedale, and they did reduce that speed limit there south of between Pinedale and Boulder, and maybe even a little further south. We haven't evaluated, and compared that to years past yet. This is the first migratory season was this past fall when that was in place, and so we will be, looking at that and comparing it to years past. The Wyoming Department of Transportation keeps good information and data on the deer that they pick up along the roads, and we can use all of that to evaluate how effective that's been. But I think your point about the fixed signs not always being very effective is probably a pretty good point, and we've observed some of the same things, and that's actually what gave rise to the idea of Trappers Point. And So what we've done in some places to try to help with that or try to make people more aware is by purchasing and using the larger dynamic messaging signs that are mobile. And just as an example, in the Pinedale and Jackson area, we've used those and moved them to specific places along the road during certain times of the year, so that it's new and that it's focused on those times when we expect that there's more of a chance of a collision with deer, and then removing them during those times when it's not, like in the middle of the summer. And so those are some of the things we've done up in that part of the world, and we've also done some things, very similar things around other parts of the state, up the North Fork, West Dakota, and other parts of the state as well.
Great, and I think we've partnered with some groups who also have the same goals of helping to conserve those species. So thanks to those partners on those signs, because they take some manpower and some money. Question from Jeannie. This is: are there any plans to limit snowmobile access to those areas where wildlife might be vulnerable right now?
Yeah, and most of the access on federal lands is governed by the land management agencies, and so we continually work with the BLM and the Forest Service in travel management. And so currently the plans that are in place are something that the agencies are working from. And should they become up for renewal, then we always provide them additional information on areas that might be more sensitive. And in the Jackson area in particular, there are some travel restrictions that keep people onto designated routes. I know on the Targhee there's some too. Are you aware of some down towards Pinedale at all? And so there's some of that, and it's whenever those travel plans come up for renewal, our staff are actively engaged with the land managers to try and implement additional areas that might be sensitive for wildlife.
The other thing I would add, Rennie, is that we have those closures on all of our commission-owned wildlife habitat management areas. Most of them are closed until it's area specific based on the wintering habits of those big game animals. But those WHMAs remain closed until wintering wildlife has moved back away from those areas.
Thank you. Yeah, we're just going to try to wrap this up here in about 10 minutes to value your time, but that doesn't mean we're done answering your questions. You can continue to send those questions to us, and we'll be answering those over the coming days. But we'll take a few more questions here now while we've got some folks live on camera. So Jesse Johnson asked us on Facebook, what can the common citizen do to help mule deer if feeding is not the answer?
So I'll take a crack at that. I think some of the things that we've mentioned as far as watching signs and those areas where we know that there are wildlife on the highways and reducing speeds. That's certainly something that folks can help with. Really, if you spend time in the outdoors and you're near those winter ranges and maintaining separation between humans and wintering big game populations is important, and reporting violations of folks that are out on violating winter range closures is important. One of the things that a lot of our partners, landowners specifically, have done that has been very helpful is opening up gates, and even in some cases modifying fences during this time of the year. Having lay down fences and those kind of things is helpful. Reporting things that to your local office, being in communication with our folks with things that you see that are out of the ordinary out on the winter ranges is definitely helpful. Participating in these kind of things and helping inform others that can't take the time in the middle of the day to come to this is also something that would certainly be helpful from our perspective. And you guys might have some other ideas.
Yeah, the only other thing in the urban centers, if you have your pets and you're out walking them at night, keep them under control, leash them. I know it's pretty hard to keep a dog that's not on a leash from chasing an animal once they're down low and they're kind of sharing the same travel corridor that we often walk on or hiking on. So that's one thing.
I guess I'd just reiterate that certainly any type of harassment, whether that be dogs or vehicles or snow machines or what have you, if you could let us know about that, and not that we would be able to solve all of that, but in the past, in some of the harsh winters we've had real problems with dogs at large harassing wildlife, especially deer and antelope. And Brian mentioned fences or other barriers. If there's anything that we can do, and if you can help us to identify those places where wildlife might be stuck, if you will, so that we could go out and try to address those. But I guess I would just ask folks, if you see those kind of things, let our local folks know what you're seeing and where that's going on, and we'll do our best to address it.
If you want to get involved or get in touch with Game and Fish at the local level, on our website there's a tab that's the regional offices, so that gives you contact information and a little bit more information about what region you might be living in of the state. So you can go there and find out about volunteer projects too. Had Randy Brutus ask, will Game and Fish need more volunteers for winter kill surveys here this year?
Yes, every year we put out a news release asking for public involvement, and so it would be great if he could reach out to the Pinedale office and start there, and we'd get him in contact with the local biologist and get him on the list.
And the answer, directly is that, yeah, I do believe that it'll be helpful if we do have more volunteers this year to really do a good job of taking a look at those winter ranges. Probably going to be a little bit different places than we've looked before because of the harsh winter. Many of those animals have moved, migrated away from places where you may have seen them in the past. The Hoback to Red Desert migration as an example. Many of those pronghorn and mule deer are clear on the south end of that migration right now. So we'll be doing surveys in a little bit different places probably.
Great. Josh Corsi is joining us. Thanks, Josh. And his question is, are there any discussions being had or planned to expand designated mule deer winter ranges? So you're just talking about the deer are kind of expanding them this year, but anything to formally designate them differently?
Yeah, and I think that we're certainly open to evaluating winter ranges periodically, and we've just evaluated those, and it's by herd. So different parts of the state will have different data sets that they might be evaluating. But as we get additional information from various winters and animal movements, we address that changes in those seasonal ranges. But the ranges that we have in place right now are pretty well defined over from historical movement patterns, and in a lot of cases they do take into account the more severe winters. But we're always open to documenting information and addressing that on a herd unit scale.
One thing too I'd say, Josh, is that the work that you and your group are participating in right now with all of those deer that now have collars on them is going to be helpful for us to make sure that to compare it to our current winter range designations to make sure we're right. And if we're not, your information is going to help us to adjust that and to work with those land management agencies that are involved in that to adjust those designations. So that's a great question.
Right. One more question online too is from Kristen, and her question was, if our plan is to let nature take its course, we may want to address that part of the question, but if kind of looking at that as how we're getting through the winter, why would we do any coyote control?
So yeah, excellent question. And I think that probably one of the differences between targeted coyote control and feeding as a way to reduce mortality is there's actually some information that indicates that the targeted coyote removal can have an impact. We've participated in those kind of projects in the past, focused mainly on fawning areas, and have documented some positive impacts. And so that's kind of a difference there, is that there's some science that indicates we could potentially increase survivability. But again, anything that we consider along those lines will be informed by a very site-specific, very localized kind of an evaluation. And we're going to need to have our local managers believing that we can actually have an impact before we're going to take something like that on.
And Roger Hayden asked if we can, we'll put some case studies, point to that research where people can go and see that research. We'll put that up on this chat room here later today.
Sure.
Another question, this is from Jerry Long off of Facebook. Jerry, thanks for joining us. Any changes to hunting seasons at this point?
Not at this point. You know, most of the winter counts were done right at the beginning of the winter, and the quality of the numbers and numbers of bucks, number of fawns was actually pretty good. And so the managers are just starting to meet at the local level, and we'll start evaluating those quotas and the season lengths in the next month and a half.
We won't have real good ideas on what those recommendations for any changes are going to be for a few weeks now. So.
Yeah.
And if you're interested, there'll be public meetings in each different part of the state, so you can hear the latest information at the regional level. Sure. And give some feedback too. So keep an eye on there. We've got a tab on our website that's Get Involved, so look for that. Did have a question kind of on that line, looking back at the existing hunting season, and this is from Clint Strong. How come there are hunting seasons that run through January if winter conditions are so bad?
Yeah, so Clint, the localized hunting seasons are pretty well adapted for local conditions, and so most of your January seasons are going to be for elk, and it's primarily driven towards addressing damage concerns. And a lot of those seasons are limited quota type license structure, so the licenses that are available are kind of limited in number, and they address a specific damage concern or an overabundance of elk in an area that may be causing damage to private lands.
All right. We're getting some great questions coming in, and again, we're not going to be able to get to all of them. I think we've probably just got time for one or two more, and then we're going to wrap up to value your time, but we will be answering questions online here over the coming days. Colton, I think it's Howard, asked, what's the impact on moose in these conditions? We've talked a lot here about deer,
Yeah.
Moose, and let's throw in antelope.
Yeah, so moose, Clinton, moose are a little bit of a different critter with they're kind of built for deep snow and really cold temperatures, and so they are prone to some effects of the winter severity, but not to the degree that you would see, say, an antelope be impacted. And the antelope, they're again a real specific forager, selective foraging animal, and they have very specific dietary requirements, and it's really difficult to implement a supplemental feeding program for antelope because their special needs are so different from a lot of the other animals, even more so than deer. And with antelope, there's a lot that we don't know about their nutritional and dietary requirements. Where deer, some of the other states have been working on it, but again, our primary concern is tied back to the disease component of that.
All right. Great. Well, I think I'll just end it there for questions, but again, we're going to answer those questions that we didn't get to that you've already submitted. We'll just be going through that and look for some more answers and some more information to go on our website here over the coming days. Thank you all for joining us and do pass this on. We're hopeful that people will continue to watch this video and shoot more questions or give us some feedback as we go forward. But just we'll throw it back out to you, Doug. Any parting thoughts?
I just think that as we all touched on, give wildlife some space, be particular attention when you're traveling, especially in those deep snow areas. Those animals, some of them will jump down into the roadway, and we'll look for an avenue off of that roadway as they're moving towards away from the disturbance that they're encountering. So just give wildlife space and try to avoid disturbance.
Right.
No, I just want to thank everyone again for taking the time to listen to our message here today, and we'll look forward to your additional comments and questions.
As do I. Certainly appreciate folks tuning in and being with us today, And I guess I would offer any department employees, if you have questions, certainly this forum provides an avenue for your questions to be answered. But if you have questions, please feel free to call our local offices or your local game warden or your local biologists and talk about specific local conditions.
Right. Well, thank you again to everybody who's taken the time to watch this, and please do continue to give us some feedback. Also interested in your feedback on the medium here. We tried something new coming online to talk to you. If this worked or didn't work for you, please give us that feedback too. Thanks a lot.